Drawing this cute scarecrow is easier than you think, and I'm about to show you exactly how you can do it. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and a little bit of design too. All you need to follow along this video is your favorite art software. I will be working with Procreate on the iPad and whatever brush comes with your software. So nothing fancy, you don't need to buy anything. In fact, there's even going to be some freebies in the video. But until then, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. So today, we're not wasting any time, we are going to jump straight into the colors. Now obviously you can customize the colors to do whatever you want, but if you want to follow along exactly with what I'm doing, you have two options. One, I'm going to add the X codes right here on the top of the screen, so you can just put that in your software. Or if you're working with Procreate just like me, you can download this color palette, it is totally free, and you can find it in the video description along with a bunch of other freebies like templates, brushes, and cheat sheets. So we're going to start with the head because it's going to inform the proportions of the rest of the body. Now, in my case, the head is going to be kind of a burlap sack. So it's going to be this color right here in the color palette, just a nice beige. But you could go with a pumpkin as well. That could look really good. So you would just pick an orange instead. And as you've seen in the intro, you can work with any brush of your choice here. It does not matter at all. If you are using Procreate, a free option would be in the sketching pack that comes with the app, the 6B pencil. If you are working in a different software, again, anything you know you like is going to be perfectly fine for this. Maybe something with pencil of the name if you want to be closer to what I'm doing. Speaking of which, I personally will be working with the Everything brush from my illustration bundle. Again, not essential at all, but if you want to check it out, it will be linked in the video description along with a special promo code for the YouTube people. Now, no matter which brush you're using, we're just going to start with a slightly squished circle, so an oval that is squished vertically. And it does not need to be perfect at all, but make sure it is fully closed so that you can come in and fill it in with your color. And just a little pro tip, if you are working with Procreate, make sure you adjust your threshold when you do that. So when you drop the color, just keep your pencil on the screen and then move it from right to left to right to left. Doesn't matter the order, but just until you find the moment right before the color fills in the entire screen. That's going to give you the best result in the end. Now in my case here, I feel like my oval is a little bit too squished down. It's not a big deal though, I'm just going to use my arrow tool here. I'm going to set it to distort, and I'm going to adjust the proportions so that it looks the way I want. So as you can see, it is really easy to play with our shapes. So for now, just draw everything fairly quickly. Don't worry if it's wobbly and if it looks off, we can always tweak things as we go. Great, so once you have that done, go ahead and rename your layer to head just so that your file stays organized. And then go ahead and create a new layer, put it under the head layer, and rename that one to body. Now I'm personally going to give my scarecrow a super classic cliché farmer look, so a red plaid shirt. So I'm going to just pick this color right here in the color palette. The body is going to be the same height as the head, so you can quickly measure that and add a rough guide. It doesn't need to be exact. And then we are going to draw a slightly rounded rectangle for the body itself. So you can see again, it is the same height as the head, but it is a little bit more narrow. Otherwise, you can go ahead, fill in the shape and adjust the threshold. Now you may also want to tweak the shape a tiny little bit if it is kind of wobbly like mine, just to make it a little bit neater. But still, you do not need to agonize more than that over the shapes because as you've seen with the head, we can easily move everything around, which we'll do at the end. For now, we're just trying to map out everything fairly quickly. So once we have the body, we're going to create a copy of it to help us create the legs. So go ahead and slide your body layer towards the left. Select duplicate, and then the top copy, we are going to rename it to legs. My scarecrow is going to be wearing these overalls that are made of denim. So I'm going to pick a nice grayish blue. In the color palette, it is this one right here. And we're simply going to drag our color over the body, this time setting the threshold at 100% to make sure it colors the entire layer, or the entire shape at least. Then from there, we can use the arrow tool and move the shape down until it just slightly overlaps with the rest of the body. So something kind of like this. Now, I know this looks absolutely crazy, but bear with me. We're going to add the arms and then we're actually going to turn this blob into overall or pants, whatever you want. But for now, we're going to draw the arms. So go back on the body layer, pick the body color, and we're going to measure the width of the head. And then we're going to place that over the middle of the body, and that's going to give us a guide that we can use for the length of the arms. Again, it doesn't need to be super precise, but it's just a quick way to make sure the proportions are decent to start with. Then you can repeat on the other side and simply connect the two marks to create the top of the arms. Now make sure here you take the time to draw a nice line. You don't want anything wobbly, you don't want anything too straight either. You should just have this slight curve, so this very smooth downward curve that is, again, barely curvy. It's almost a straight line, just going down a little bit on the ends. Scarecrows are often on this cross type post, and so the arms are essentially resting on one big piece of wood, and the body, or the shirt at least, is filled with straw. And then the arms are closed by tying strings around the wrist around the post. So that means for the arms, we're going to draw the end of the sleeve, so the open bit, and then it's going to come up where the string would be around the wrist, and then it's going to come back down and flop over a little bit. Once more, you can fill that in, adjusting the threshold as needed. And we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. But my scarecrow in my mind is slightly turned toward the right, meaning I'm not going to have the armpit on this side, it's going to be hidden by the body. So we're just going to start straight with the curve that goes down and then up into that wrist tie and then the actual opening on the arm. And I might make this arm a little bit shorter because again, the armpit is hidden by the body, so that should be reflected in the side of the arm. Or size of the arm, sorry. Then otherwise we can go ahead and fill in the shape. And I might make this arm even bigger, just for fun, why not? So again, we can use our selection tool here, making sure it is set to freehand, which is going to allow us to draw a selection around whatever element we want. And then we can either set it to uniform if we want to keep the same proportions, or distort if we want to change the proportions. In my case, I just want to make it bigger, so I'm going to set it to uniform. But that way we can easily adjust just smaller parts of bigger shapes. So that's really what I mean when I say don't agonize over the shapes, just draw them real quick and then you can easily edit them. That's the beauty of digital art. So now that we have the arms, the next thing is going to be refining the overalls. So you can go back on your legs layer, color pick the color you used for the legs, and we're going to draw essentially the flap or like the bib part of the overalls. So you're going to align that with, well, almost the outside edge, and you're going to draw a curvy trapeze. Otherwise, very simple, like for everything else, we're just going to fill it in and adjust the threshold as needed. Then from there, we're going to draw the side of the overalls. So we're just going to follow the curve that we have on the front flap, and we're going to create this big U shape up to the back. Then we can connect that with the bottom of the legs and fill in the shape to complete that side of the overalls. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, but the U is going to be a little bit smaller because our scarecrow, at least mine, is facing slightly sideways. I might tweak that side a tiny little bit to make it thicker. Feel free to do the same if you want. Now, once we have that bib part, we're going to be able to draw the straps. So you can just zoom onto the shoulders and draw one tiny curve like this, then double it to create the thickness of the straps. Create a V shape at the bottom and connect the top so we can fill it in. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other side, so a tiny curve, doubling it, and connecting with the bib in a V shape. Making sure we close the top even if we don't see it, and then filling in the shape. Now I'm kind of changing my mind here. I think I'm going to have the bib be a little bit wider, so I'm just going to extend my curves outward like this. Great, now we're going to refine the shape of the legs so that they're tied in a little knot at the bottom around the stakes. So you can go ahead and set your eraser to the same brush you're using as your paintbrush, in my case the everything brush. And keeping the same length, we're just going to erase the side to create this kind of point at the bottom. Now, if you're working with a pencil brush like me, you might notice that if you zoom onto your shapes, you have some little noise, especially on the edges and between shapes. And the reason for that is, well, yeah, we're using a brush that is texture and then we're filling in those shapes with just color drop. So if that annoys you, you can simply duplicate your layer that is concerned by the noise, or that has the noise on it, I should say, by swiping it toward the left with one finger. And then if you merge those two copies, you're going to pretty much eliminate the noise. I personally like the noise because I'm trying to build as much texture as I can within my illustrations, and that's part of the texture. So I'm going to leave it as is, but feel free to use that trick if you want to get rid of the texture. Okay, now with that said, we're going to go back to the legs to add a big knot at the bottom, but if you're like me, you might be missing room, like you don't have enough room to draw that knot, so you can just swipe your layers toward the right to select them. And then with your arrow tool set to uniform, you're going to be able to, well, reposition the piece if you want, but you're also going to be able to resize the illustration. So just make sure you have some room both at the top so you can add a hat later, and at the bottom so we can add a knot. And then once that is done, you can just go back on the legs layer and draw your circle for the knot. Now, use the paintbrush, not the eraser like I did. That's going to be way easier. So it's just this small little circle. You can fill it in as well, of course. And then at the bottom, for the part of the fabric that would be poking out of the knot, you can draw this kind of leafy shape. It should be almost the same size as the knot itself. Great, now this was by far the hardest part of the entire video. Now we're just going to add some elements to make the character more personalized and just more fun in general, and those elements are quite a bit easier because you don't have to worry about the proportions nearly as much. Now the first one I'm going to add is a big floppy farmer's hat, but you could add whatever you want really. If you do want to add a hat, go ahead and create a new layer above the head for now. We're going to move it in a few steps and rename that new layer to hat. Again, mine is going to be, in my mind, this straw farmer's hat that might be a little bit old. So I'm going to pick a darker version of my burlap color. In the color palette, it is this one right here. And I'm going to start by drawing a big oval that would be the brim. Now the top of the hat could be really multiple shapes. It could be a simple curve if you want to have more of a melon hat. It could be a square rectangle. I'm going to have this soft M shape to make it look once more like this old straw hat. No matter the shape though, one thing that is important is to make sure the front is actually resting on the head so that the hat is not just floating in thin air. Now don't agonize too much over the line itself, fill in the shape rather quickly, and then it's going to be easier to see what the shape looks like when it's filled in rather than just outlined. You're going to be able to adjust it as needed way more easily that way. Now once you have a shape that you're happy with, or at least happy with it for now, we're going to put the hat under the head so that we can, well, see the head. So open your layer panel and just drag it under everything else. And then we're going to go back on the head layer and we are going to erase the brim back in. Now if you want, you could just have the same line that we initially add when we drew the oval. So you could have that as your brim. In my mind, again, mine is this floppy hat, so I'm going to have more of a curvy shape. Then all you have to do is erase the part of the head that is overlapping the top of the hat. And at this stage, you have even more information about the shape of the hat, so you may want to go back and play with it some more, maybe even play with the head. In my case, I feel like the bottom section is just too big and too heavy and too floppy, so I'm literally just going to take my eraser and fix that. Feel free to do the same. Again, if there's any part at this stage of the shapes that you have that you're not happy with, just pause the video and go play with them until you're happy with them. Okay, this is starting to look pretty much like a scarecrow, but we have a few more elements that we need to do to make it really look like a scarecrow, mainly adding the stakes and the straw. So go ahead and create a new layer under all the other layers you have so far and rename it to straw and stakes. Here we're going to pick a nice medium brown, so this one right here in the color palette. And with that, we're going to draw one stick poking out of the bottom of the scarecrow, so out of the knot. Then zooming on to the arms, we're going to draw one stick that is aligning with the top of the arm, because when you think about it, the fabric is resting on top of that stick. You can make it long, short, pointy, not pointy, however you want. You can also add some secondary branches like this to make it even more fun. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So aligning it with the top of the arm, I might make this one a little bit longer. And I might add 2 secondary branches this time. And then we're going to add some straw poking out of the sleeves, so you can go ahead and pick a nice warm golden pale yellow. And you're going to add blades of straw coming out of each sleeve. So feel free to pause the video here, take all the time you need to rework those shapes, those basic shapes that we have. And then once you're done with that, we're going to meet in the next chapter, which is going to be about creating a super simple background. Great, now the background could really be whatever you want. It could be the entire background, like the entire canvas, I should say, or it could be a specific shape, which is what I'm going to do. So no matter which option you choose, go ahead and create a new layer at the bottom of your layer list. Obviously, it's the background, and rename it to, well, background. And in my mind, my scarecrow is standing in this nice sunny field, so I'm going to pick a nice bright blue right here in the color palette. You can see it's almost white, but not quite. And if you want the whole background, you can just drop your color onto that background layer. Otherwise, make your brush quite a bit bigger and draw whatever shape you want the background to be. So I'm going to draw this very wobbly, wonky circle. Just popping in for a second, if you are enjoying today's video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you are not already. I know this is the most YouTuber thing to say, and it still pains me to say it, but it really makes a huge difference when people do that. And it's a great way to support your favorite creators and help us create more free content for you. And if you really love the video, feel free to share it with people, or just share your illustration on social media and mention the tutorial. Those things are incredibly helpful as well. So huge thank you for your help, and let's get back to the video. Then from here, we're going to activate what is called alpha lock so that we can draw the background within that shape. If you're using the whole background, you don't have to worry about that. But if you are using a shape like me, we're going to take 2 fingers and we're going to swipe that background layer towards the right. Or alternatively, you could just go ahead and tap on the layer and activate alpha lock in this menu right here. Now what alpha lock does is whatever we draw on the background layer is going to stay within the shape that we have. So we're going to create a bit of a gradient in the sky now. So if you're using my color palette, we're going to move on to this color right here, which is just pure white. And we are going to draw a slightly angled line, so a very slight diagonal line. And I'm going to have mine go upward toward the right. Now you want to make sure it's not right under the arm. You want to give it a little bit of clearance. Otherwise, again, you can see nothing super precise. And with that, we're going to create a gradient from the top of our white line toward the top of the background shape. So super easy. Now the bottom is going to be just as easy. In my mind, again, it's standing in field, so I'm going to pick this nice golden straw color. And the color palette, it is this one right here, which is almost like a pale banana color, like the inside of the banana, not the peel that is. And then you're just going to manually fill in the whole bottom section. So you don't want to do color drop, you want to have some of that texture showing through, so you have some of that blue showing through as well. Now once that is done, go ahead and pick this darker yellow here in the color palette. And then we are going to create a gradient just like we did in the sky, but this time starting from the bottom and going up. Now again, we don't want to do color drop because we want to see some of that gray in that blue. It is going to help us have a richer color in our field. So as a reminder, you can here either make your brush quite a bit bigger, or if you have an Apple Pencil and a brush that is compatible with tilt sensitivity, or a brush that has tilt capacities, I guess, you can just tilt your pencil like you would a regular coloring pencil and create your gradient that way. Now this looks like our scarecrow is staying on a beach, so we're going to add some darker lines that are going in a different direction, kind of toward the top left in my case, to make this go from a beach to a field with rows. So it would look a little bit more like, I don't know, like a wheat or something like that any kind of grain crop pretty much. So yeah, just very simple lines like this. And to work on the depth effect really easily, make sure that your lines start really spaced out, and then the closer you get to the outside right edge, the closer the lines are going to be together. Now I'm just going to hide my background color just so I have a better feel of what the actual, scarecrow is going to look like. And by a background color, I mean just the white that comes with the Procreate canvas. And then from there, we are going to add some details to kind of bring the character to life, because it's starting to look good, but it's also still just pretty boring. So we're going to add some facial features to actually bring our Scarecrow to life. So go ahead and create a new layer above all the other layers you have so far, and rename that new layer to Facial Features. Now this is again something that you can very easily customize to make the Scarecrow and the whole illustration your own. So feel free to experiment here. I'm personally going to start with the nose, which I'm going to pretend is the same color as the shirt, just like the farmer again took a piece of the shirt that was, ripped out or something and used that to sew the nose. So I'm going to color pick my red right here, but you could use whatever you want, of course. And the shape, you have so many options. You could go with a normal nose shape. You could literally draw it on, pretending the farmer maybe used a marker to draw it on the burlap sack. Or you could, think of more of a patch. So I'm going to go with a triangle. You could go with an oval, really. I mean, you get the idea. You can do whatever you want here. But I'm going to go with this triangle right here, at least to start with. And I'm going to build the other shapes around that triangle and then move stuff around, change stuff around until I'm super happy with my Scarecrow. You could have a little X like this for the nose. That could also be super cute. Really, there's just so many little things that you can do that are simple shapes that could be really, really fun. Maybe not a red circle. That might look a little bit too much like a clown. But even then, you could have a clown Scarecrow, I'm not the Scarecrow police, so just do your thing. And then from there, we're going to quickly map out the eyes. Now, I'm going to pick this dark brown right here in the color palette, because I want the eyes to be probably the darkest thing in the whole piece so that they contrast really well with the rest and we can see them very, very clearly. But otherwise, same thing, you can do really whatever shape you want. You can either think the farmer used the marker, maybe they're sewing some little patches like the nose. You could maybe even have happy eyes like this if you want. I don't know. I'm just gonna go with simple ovals, kind of like beady eyes. And I've said this before in the video, but I'm gonna say it again. Don't agonize at this stage over the exact placement and the exact shape and size of your elements. Just draw them, and then you can always come back and use your selection tool and your arrow tool to move stuff around until you're happy with the positioning and the proportions of everything. So for now, just try something and keep moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, the next thing we're going to do here is draw a mouth. I'm probably going to use the same color I used for my straw hat so that there's some coherence. Actually, I might use the color of the stick just so that we can see the smile a little bit better. Yeah, I think I'll go with that. Although not with that crazy size, that was too much tilt. But yeah, you have so many once more opportunity here to experiment and personalize your Scarecrow. So you could have just a straight mouth, a tiny cutesy mouth. I'm going to have what in my mind is the quintessential Scarecrow mouth, which is just a super big, kind of creepy, but also kind of cute mouth. Surprisingly, I was really struggling, as you can see here, to get it just right. So it's a curvy line that is really, really wide, but not super deep in the sense that it doesn't go down a whole lot. And then to really bring it home, I'm adding these stitches all across the mouth. So these straight lines, maybe one X, maybe a couple straight lines closer together, just making it look like it's stitch marks, but that were done pretty roughly. I think that just adds a lot to the whole vibe. Then once you do have all your facial features mapped out, now is a great time to, take your selection tool and move stuff around if you feel like you need to move stuff around. It could be fine from the start, that's great, but don't just settle for something you're not happy with. Facial features, I always say it, are so important. They're worth taking the time to get them just right. So in my case, I feel like the eyes were maybe a little bit too long. So I'm going to use here my arrow tool, and I'm going to rotate my bounding box using the yellow anchor here at the bottom so that my bounding box is aligned with the eyes, and that's going to allow me to shrink them, distort them evenly and then rotate them a little bit more easily. Now in your case, the eyes might be fine, so that might be something else that you play with, but really just take the time is what I'm saying here. Take the time to make sure you're super, super, super happy with the facial features. Even if this is what you spend the most time on in the entire illustration process, that's okay. Now the next thing we're going to draw is going to be some, what I'm going to call extras, so patches and other details like that we can add to add more personality to our character. So go ahead and create a new layer. In my case, I'm just going to put it above the legs because again, it's going to be patches, so that's where the patches would be. So here, once more, just same thing as the nose, I'm going to color pick the color of the shirt to pretend that the farmer is using parts of the shirts as patches. And I'm going to draw one little rectangle patch here on the leg. And I'm going to add one on the hat as well, but I'm going to use, just color pick an area in my field here. It's not going to be an exact color from the palette, but something along those lines so that I can balance the lower section of my illustration with the top section and bring some of those colors up as well. So it's just going to look more coherent, essentially is what I'm saying. And I'm going to draw this one as a vertical rectangle instead of horizontal. I'm also going to add some buttons on the overalls, because otherwise how would they hold? And I kind of got carried away because I actually had a yellow here in my color palette for the buttons, so I'm going to change that real quick. And then from there, we're going to pick this pale blue right here in the color palette, and I'm going to use that to draw a pocket on the overalls. So I'm going to start with this slightly curved line that matches the top of the bib. And then I'm going to draw a rounded V, almost a U, but with a little point at the bottom to close the pocket. Great. So the next thing we're going to do, at least if you have patches, is we're going to add some stitch marks on them. And the color you use for the thread is really up to you. I'm just going to color pick the color of the burlap, again, to bring this kind of unity in the piece. And I'm going to draw the same type of stitches as I did around the mouth. So some small, slightly curvy lines and maybe an X here and there as well. Now this is starting to look really good, but it's also looking quite plain compared to the background. So we're going to add a bit of texture. I'm going to do that by adding a plaid texture on the shirt, but you could really add whatever other texture of your choice. So go ahead and create a new layer above the body layer. And rename that new layer to plaid. Then to make our job a little bit easier, kind of like what we did on the background, we are going to use a mask, but we're going to use a different type of mask. This time we're going to go with what is called a clipping mask. So go ahead and tap on your plaid layer and activate clipping mask in the menu right here. Now whatever you draw on the plaid layer is going to stay within the body shape, but it is compared to the background, or as opposed to the background I should say, on a separate layer, which is going to allow us to later play with opacity and create that really nice, almost like the tablecloth that you get on the picnic table, that kind of texture. For now, go ahead and pick a lighter version of your shirt color. In the color palette, it is this one right here. You can see it's almost white, but not quite. And we are going to draw some vertical lines all over the body that have a slight curve to them. You could have them narrow, you can have them be very wide, you could have a pattern, a rhythmic pattern between them, so narrow and wide. Or you could not even have lines, you could just have polka dots, whatever you want. And then we're going to repeat, but with horizontal lines this time. So go ahead and create a new layer above the plaid that you already have. Rename that new layer to plaid as well, making sure it is also applied as a clipping mask so that you stay within the shape of the body. Then otherwise, same thing, but we're going to draw horizontal lines this time, making sure they are also slightly curved, just so that they look like they're following the shape of the body and they don't just look weirdly, artificially stiff. Now, if you have big poofy or droopy sleeves like I do, you may want to have a more pronounced line at the bottom of the sleeve, because when you think about it, not only the fabric is cinched by the tie around the wrist, the pattern is also going to be moving that way. So you need to make sure the pattern is following the fabric. And this is when we're going to do the magic trick to turn this into an actual plaid shirt. So we're going to simply lower the opacity of both of those layers so that we can see when they intersect with each other. So you can just tap on the little N right here next to the check mark and play with this opacity slider, setting it to whatever looks good to you. So in my case, I'm going to go with around 33. It doesn't need to be exact. I went with 34, that's good enough. We're going to do the same thing on both layers. And there you go, that's it. Now you have a really cool plaid shirt. Great. Now the head is looking a little bit boring now, so we're going to add some textures on that burlap bag as well. If you're working on the pumpkin, you can honestly follow the same steps, because what I'm going to do would work really well for a pumpkin too. And obviously we want that texture to stay within the shape of the head that we already have. So just like we did for the background, we are going to create a mask, this time the alpha lock type, so you can just swipe your layer towards the right with 2 fingers. In here I'm just going to go with a slightly darker version of my burlap bag color, which is this one right here in the color palette. And then with that, whether you're drawing a burlap bag and want some red texture or a pumpkin, we're going to draw some curved lines, some vertical curved line. But to help show the volume of the head, we are going to draw those curved lines in a very specific way. So the curved lines on the right are going to be facing or opening toward the right, and then the curved line on the left side of the head are going to be facing the left. The curved lines in the middle are going to be widely spaced. And then as they get toward the edge of the face, because the head is curving away from us, those lines are going to be closer together, so tighter together. But don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So it's going to look something like this. You have these curved lines that are facing 2 different directions, depending on which half of the face they are. And as you can see, they're getting quite a bit closer together the closer we get to the edge. Now, if you're working with a head that is made of burlap, like in my case, those lines can be quite wobbly because, again, burlap is a pretty loose type of fabric. In theory, you would also have some horizontal lines, but I find that looks too busy, so I'm just going to go with a vertical line. If your head is made out of a pumpkin, you probably want those lines to be a little bit straighter. Well, not straighter. They still should be curvy, but you don't want them to be too wobbly because pumpkins are usually pretty, clean and crisp. Now, while I'm working on the head, I'm also going to add some straw hair on my character. I just think that's going to look super, super cute and super fun. So if you want to do that, go ahead and color pick the color of your straw. And to be able to actually draw on the head and have something poke out of the head shape, we're going to need to deactivate alpha lock. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck within what we already had. So by swiping the layer towards the right with 2 fingers. And then from there, we're going to be able to draw our little straw hair. I'm just going to draw 3 strands, which is super simple, but I don't know what it is. Somehow now the character looks way more complete. So feel free to pause the video here if there's anything else you want to add on your character in terms of any element you might want to add. Then once you're done with that, we're going to meet in the next chapter, which is going to be all about shading and light, and that's going to completely transform the piece, and it's going to be pretty quick and easy. So I'll see you then. At this stage, we are going to add some shadows, and it's going to be quite simple. But before that, we're going to group all the layers except for the background. So you can swipe your layers towards the right with 1 finger. That's going to help you select them all. And then you can tap on group right here at the very top. And then we can collapse the group by clicking on this arrow right here, or tapping, I should say. And then we are going to rename our group to Scarecrow. And here, usually I would tell you once that is done, go ahead and create a new layer above everything, and we're going to use some sort of a tool like alpha lock or clipping mask so that our shadow stays within our shape. But here we're going to have a bit of a magic trick that I'm going to show you. So go ahead and duplicate your Scarecrow group by swiping it toward the left with 1 finger. And then we're going to merge that group to have just 1 layer with all the shapes. So you can tap on the group, select flatten, and now we're going to have that new layer with everything on it. But we still also have every single individual layers within the group, so if you need to edit something down the road, it is super easy. Now, once we have that, go ahead and create a new layer above everything and rename that new layer to Shadows. Now we want those shadows to stay within the shape of the Scarecrow. So what we can do here is create a mask on the shadow layer, and this is where the hack happens. If you hold 2 fingers on your new layer, it's going to select all the pixels on that layer, which in our case is conveniently the Scarecrow. So we're going to end up with a silhouette essentially. And then going back on your shadow layer, still with the selection, of course, you're going to be able to tap on that layer and select mask from the menu. So now as you can see, you have a new mask, which has the silhouette of the Scarecrow. So everything we're going to draw on the shadows layer is going to stay within the silhouette shape. You can go ahead and deactivate the selection, it's still going to work. And you can hide the layer we used to pick up the selection because we want to see the layers within the Scarecrow group so that we can come back and edit those individual layers later if we need to. So essentially, using a layer mask like this is going to allow you to focus on just one shape, in our case, the silhouette of the Scarecrow, without needing to apply that layer mask to just one individual layer, like a clipping mask, or without needing to draw on one layer like Alpha Lock. Now, if you want to learn more about the 3 different types of masks, which we talked about really briefly in this video, I have a whole video in which it is just a full deep dive about masks and when to use them, and the difference about them, and just how you can essentially elevate your workflow by using the different type of masks. So I will link that video in the video description below. With that said though, we are going to draw our shadows, and to make it as easy as possible on ourselves, we are going to use what is called a blending mode, and you can access those usually with the opacity of your layers. So in Procreate, just tapping on a little N next to the check mark, you can get this list with a bunch of seemingly random names. The one we're going to go for is Multiply, which is in most digital art software, so you should be able to find it. But otherwise, just scroll through whatever list you have and try to find something that makes your colors darker. And we're also going to lower the opacity for now around 50%, but this is also, or actually maybe 60, I'm lying here, but this is something that you can always edit later down the road. Now, a blending mode is really handy because it's going to allow you to use just one color, and then the software is going to automatically adapt that color to whatever is underneath. Here, I'm going to pick this purpley pink in the color palette, but you can experiment with different things, of course. The only thing I would recommend doing is not using anything like a neutral gray or black, because your colors are going to look really muddy if you do that. So we're going to start very easy here with just the section of the hat, or the brim, I guess, the underside of the brim, there we go. And we're literally just going to fill that whole thing in. So whatever technique you want to use to do that, go ahead. I'm personally going to fill it in manually so that once more I can build some of that nice texture that I am so looking for, I guess, in my piece. And so we've barely done anything. We've just done the underside of the brim, but already it just looks so much better and much richer. So we're going to keep adding some shadows using the same technique, but we might first refine that edge of the brim by adding some thickness. So just using your eraser essentially and erasing the very outline of that brim. Now, once that is done, we are going to keep moving through our shadows and just keep adding them and refining the piece. Now, the brim is obviously going to be casting a shadow on the head, so we are going to draw that shadow next. It's going to be in 2 parts. The first one is going to be in the front, and the second one is going to be in the back. So we're going to start with the one in the front, and it's going to be just this simple, almost triangular shape that otherwise you can just fill in just like you did the underside of the hat. So you can see it's almost more like a crescent moon shape, I guess, than a triangle. Now we're going to do the same thing almost in the back, but it's going to be a bigger shape this time. And we're going to soften those shadows a little tiny bit by using our eraser. Again, just set to the same brush as you're using as your paintbrush. And erasing that edge just very gently. You don't want to fully erase it, of course, but you want to create essentially that kind of textured gradient on the edge. And while we have the eraser, we can also go back and erase the shadow over the hair so that they just pop, because otherwise we really lose them, I feel, in the shadows. So from there, we're going to move on to the body. And the head should be casting a shadow on the arms. So you could go ahead and kind of like we did for this part of the head, just draw a very thin, narrow shadow on the top of the arm and shoulder, that is. And then you can bring that over just the suspender part of the overalls. Maybe a little bit on the neck as well. And on the other suspender as well. Now, I guess at this point it's more of the head casting the shadow, but it's still, the result is still the same. Now we're also going to add some shadows on the bottom of the sleeves, so you can really just follow the shape of the fabric here, nothing fancy. And we're also going to have a shadow on this side of the body because, again, in my mind, I should have mentioned it, I guess, but the light source is right here on the top right. So we're going to draw a shadow almost on the edge, but not quite there, from the armpit down to the knot. Now we're going to use a shadow to separate the legs, but first we're going to draw a little curve like this on top of the knot. And then we're going to bring one slightly curved line roughly in the middle of our blue section. And then just kind of extra curve to create the crotch. Now once you have that, you can, on the right leg or on the leg that is on the right, you know what I mean, you can create a soft shadow like this. Then we can go ahead and define the bottom of the knot and add this kind of Y shape in it. So it's just going to make it look a little bit more like a knot. And maybe we can add a couple lines on this floppy shape at the end. And we can also maybe separate the suspender parts that we had at first, because right now they're just all blended in. So we can extend the curvy lines and then draw a simple pointy shape, just like we had when we first sketched the suspenders. You can also draw a shadow under the buttons, and maybe a small one on the button itself, just to give it a little bit more, well, depth and dimension. And we're almost done with the shadows here. We're just going to add a simple one on the top of the hat, because otherwise it's a bit flat and boring. And before we move on to the highlights, we're going to use a magic trick to make the shadows a little bit more interesting. So make sure you are on your shadows layer. Then go ahead and pick your selection tool right here. Make sure it is set to freehand, and draw a selection on top of your character. It doesn't need to be any precise shape, whatever blob works just fine. Then tap on the little circle right here to close your selection. And then in the menu at the bottom, pick feather. The feathering amount is going to depend on many things and it doesn't need to be exact, so anything between 30 and 50% is probably going to work just fine. I'm going to set mine around 40% and honestly call it a day. Then with that, we are going to create a gradient with the shadow. So in your adjustment panel here at the top, go ahead and pick hue, saturation, and brightness. And we're going to move the hue, so what we usually call the color, to create the gradient. And I'm going to move mine toward the right to have more of an orange color at the top of my shadow. And if we exit this menu, we can see on the shadow layer, now we have a bit of a gradient. Now we might repeat this step by creating another selection, but this time on the bottom left. So selection tool, closing the selection by tapping on the gray circle, and then feathering the selection anywhere between 30 and 50%. Then going in the adjustment panel, picking hue, saturation, and brightness. And this time we're going to move the other way to get the opposite effect. So in my case, moving toward blue. And then just like that, very easily, we can see it took a few seconds, but we have a really nice effect in our shadow that is going to make the piece so much richer. See, if I go ahead and undo a few times, you can see everything was purple. And then if I redo, now we have something more orange around the face and more blue towards the legs. Great. Now from here, we're just going to quickly finish up the piece by adding some highlights, which is going to make it pop quite a bit more. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything you have and rename that new layer to highlights. Just like we did for the shadows, we are going to use a blending mode. So you can tap on the little N next to the check mark, and I'm going to pick the blending mode add. Now it's my favorite, you've seen me use it before, and you know that it is super strong. So for now, I'm going to set it around 50%. Now you can pick whatever bright color you want here. I'm going to go with this super bright yellow. And we are going to outline the shapes that are facing towards our light source, so in my case, the top right. It is super simple, it's just this line right here on the very top of the hat. Maybe one on this side of the face as well. Most definitely on this piece of the brim of the hat. The top of the arms. The right side of the suspenders. The top of the flap. The right side of the overalls. The legs. That small crotch piece. And maybe a little bit of the knot. Then nothing more complicated than that. You can then go back and play with the opacity of your highlights. I'm going to keep mine pretty intense, probably around 40%. Now you can also play with the opacity of the shadows to see what intensity you want. I'm going to keep mine around, let's say 58%. Why not? And there you go. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to learn how to draw more fall theme illustrations, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have a bunch more for you. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to make sure you don't miss any future tutorials. Then click on the link right here, and I'll meet you there.